Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. All right, we're here with Carleton University's Stephanie Carvin. Now, there's been a lot of talk with the canola tariffs that China's been putting on, and some people are saying, well, we should just make an EV deal with China and get it over with. But there's trade-offs for that, and the person I know to talk to is Steph. So let's talk about what those trade-offs are if people think that we should come to an EV deal with China just for the sake of canola tariffs.
Right. Okay. So there's like a whole lot of things to unpack here. And I just want to preface this by saying I'm Stephanie Carvin, national security expert, and not Stephanie Carvin, trade expert.
Yes.
So but I think the thing is with China is that you can't unlock the trade aspect to the national security aspect. They are fundamentally linked. This is one of the greatest challenges that we as a country have been facing, I would say, since the end of the Cold War, is how, in the 1990s and the 80s, actually, the whole mantra of government was get out of business, let business make all of the decisions, right? And we should just let the economy go for it. And I think in the last 10 to 15 years, we've really kind of been like, oh no, we need to get back into this because there is stuff happening that we are not a fan of. And so we've been ever since, and I think the canola, like whether we're talking about Huawei, electric vehicles, all this stuff is kind of linked in this weird having to re-understand what the role of national security is in the economy, right? And I think this, to a certain extent, we're having that conversation now with the United States. Which is kind of forcing us to, even rebalance that. It adds that layer of complexity to what we're trying to do. So that's just kind of my starting statement, right?
For sure.
This is a complex issue. And I also would just, the last caveat I'll add here is I just want to say it's like my heart goes out to the canola farmers, right? Because they are always the number one target, and they always have been. And I think, so if we start off by talking about EVs, we can actually start off by talking about canola, because one of the things that if you look at every single canola ban we've had, where like suddenly there's a health concern, like, ooh, there's like black leg fungus or something like that. That's the usual one they go to. Or pork products. Actually, pork is another really big one that they like to target. They always somehow find some kind of health issue or crisis issue right before there's a trade negotiation with Canada, right? Right before they're like, oh, this. So basically what that does is that it requires us to give up something in order for us to return to the status quo, because it becomes something that becomes part of that negotiation. And this is a strategy that's been going on for like decades with that country. So it's not surprising to me that canola is being targeted. It certainly took them a while, but I think that China does see that we're under renewed pressure from the United States. I think they also may sense there's an opening to China right now. So kind of perversely, they're ratcheting up the pressure. And as a result, that's what they're doing.
I've certainly heard people talking about, oh, China's not threatening to annex us, so we should trade more with them. And it's like,
it kind of depends on your definition of annexing. You don't need territorial acquisition these days to have like leverage, as we've seen in other areas. So okay. So I think this is the issue writ large, is that canola is always a target, and it's my understanding that actually canola does employ more people in Canada than auto manufacturing. I could be mistaken on that.
Not entirely sure, but if
you look at them, there is it's a large number of people who actually do work in this sector, and I don't understand why we've been so unsuccessful at finding new markets for canola products, because it's not like this is a new, like I said, this has been going on for decades. It just must be a hard thing to do, or I don't understand, but it's a vulnerability we've always had in this sector.
It is a vulnerability, and they are starting to do things with biofuels in this country with canola, but it's still slow and ramping up. So we're a little ways away, I think, from still trying to create some distance with that market.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's not something you can, again, this is where Stephanie Carvin, agriculture expert, does not exist, right? Like, so I'm assuming it's a hard thing to change, and just trying to be upfront about my wide chasms of non-knowledge,
Right.
so which is probably not helpful for your audience, but so they know where I'm coming from. So let's get to the issue of EVs then,
Yeah.
and what the concern is. And I think what's really important here is not just to look at the issues from a purely Canadian perspective, but also look at what's happening in Europe, what's happening in other parts of the world too, right? Because they are also having these conversations. China, my understanding is their EVs are actually phenomenal. Like the reviews I've seen.
This is everything I'm hearing.
Right? They look kind of cool. They're talking about batteries that can fully charge in 5 minutes, which, I can't even get my phone to charge in 5 minutes. So that would be great. And so there's a lot of really cool tech that's being developed there. And they have a lot of capacity, and new factories, modern factories, they can put all this out very, very quickly. And there's an environmental case to be made, obviously, right? That it's good if we have more electronic vehicles that are affordable, because they also tend to be a lot cheaper than what is available here in North America and to a certain extent Europe. Although in Europe they do have China has a larger share of the market in Europe. So all that, so we came up with an agreement with the United States because if you go back, and then Minister of Industry, Francois Philippe Champagne said, you can actually make an EV in Canada from soup to nuts, like basically from mining the elements that you need through to the actual shipment. We have everything that we need in this country. And I think Canada has seen this as an opportunity, but the startup is the hardest part.
Yeah.
And the concern is that if China is allowed to dump into our market, then they're going to basically wipe out our industry, and we're not going to have any industry, and we're going to be entirely dependent on China for cars.
Yeah.
For electronic vehicle cars, like probably, not entirely, but like the vast, they're so much cheaper and to a certain extent more advanced. So I don't want to say they're not good. I don't know actually. But this is the concern. So the way I would discuss this from a national security perspective is not so much as a cyber issue. I think the cyber issue is there, right? I do think the cyber issue is there. These cars aren't cars. They collect data on their users. They have automatic updates. They're going to be accessing our networks. The charging stations can potentially collect it. I mean, they can be data sponges, and I don't want to downplay that at all. Yeah. But I think the real issue is that of economic national security, right? I think the concern is that if China's allowed to dump its electronic vehicles in this country, it is going to create a monopoly. Many of these Chinese companies are state subsidized, and China can subsidize these companies to a far greater extent than our country is willing to subsidize our EV industry. I mean, the most basic subsidies to the EV industry are highly controversial. We've seen that in Parliament. You've seen that in Parliament.
Yes. Oh, have I ever?
Right? These discussions about Honda and all these other things, right? And so because those issues don't exist in China, their companies have a distinct unfair advantage. And so you would basically be looking at the really decimating the automotive industry in this country. And some people might say, well, that's fine. This is a political decision, a political discussion. I'm just trying to lay out what that economic national security case is that basically this would be China looking to use what we would consider to be unfair trading tactics to bring these little data sponges into the country and potentially affect our national security that way. And so I think that this is something that we have to decide. Is the environmental cost worth it? Is it helpful for consumers who don't want to pay $60,000 for electronic? I don't even know how much they cost. I haven't bought a car since the pandemic started. So I have no idea where we are on the cars. But I mean, like the ability to get a fairly decent car for like $20,000, I think would be very appealing. And so all of these are trade-offs that have to be considered. It's not just, let's dump EVs, or let's just allow EVs and we're going to save canola. Because frankly, the Chinese are going to ban canola again. Yeah. Like they're going to find something else. Like we're not going to save canola by just bringing in EVs. They're just going to find all these things. So this is why I think it's a bit of a false argument. This is why I think we have to be careful with bringing in the EVs. And then the final thing I would say is like Donald Trump ain't going to be happy if we come up with an EV agreement with China. I mean, we shouldn't always base everything on what Donald Trump does for very obvious reasons. But
Yeah.
I mean, there are going to be trade implications of that, especially right now, to make that deal with China at a time when we're trying to at least figure out where we're going with Kuzma or Usmaka or whatever you want to call it. Then this is it. So sorry, that was a long rant. And
But
if
there's
you want
a lot of
to,
moving parts in this, and that's why
so many parts.
and that's why it takes so much to start like disentangling where some of them are.
Right. And so I like what I'm saying. Like, I don't think there's I just think so. Like when you sit down and try to think about it, if we do give in to China on this, I just like they've consistently used canola on so many different things that they don't like, and they're going to continue to do that. So to give in to them on this isn't going to solve the larger problem of what do you do with a state that is just willing to use these kind of gray zone tactics economically in order to consistently put pressure on us.
Yeah, and there was something you mentioned a while ago about no, not today, but I'm talking months and months ago that that caught my attention, and we've never really had a chance to dig into it. Is about China trying to develop this monoculture around clean tech in order to dissuade other countries from being able to develop their own industries. And I just wanted to kind of poke into that a little more as well, because I think that's a really relevant piece of this particular conversation.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So when we talk about monoculture, and it's interesting, it's not just green tech. Green tech is one of those priority areas for China, but also cell phones, right? This is why we banned one of the reasons we banned Huawei. It's not really just for cybersecurity. It's because they're using the state subsidized, a state championed country, and dumping tons of money on, and effectively undercutting the competition. I mean, our economy works when it's a level playing field, and we can have a whole conversation. I'm not that expert on why on the economic landscape of this country that, where it isn't a level playing field and some of the problems as a result. But I think the concern is that it would really skew the landscape in such a way that it would be able to dominate the phone markets. And that's where there are these concerns with Huawei. And the same applies with green tech. And there's been a lot of evidence to suggest that there has been a number of green tech companies in Canada and the United States where all their IP has been stolen, and then shipped probably by Chinese actors and state actors or their contractors, and because there are like private groups that do this stuff too. And then they take that technology and develop it, and they, the labor standards are very different over there, and the pay scale is very different over there. So they develop it, and then they basically sell the same product but cheaper, and they undercut the domestic market. So the concern is that they're doing this in a number of high-tech areas, and that's bad not just because it skews our economic landscape, but it's also bad when you have tech monocultures because it hurts innovation. You want companies competing with each other because it makes the products better. You can have competition for safety, right? I mean, one of the reasons I personally, this is not an iPhone ad at all, but like, the reason I like iPhone is like, I kind of like some of their safety features. So I go with that. And so these kinds of, when China can dominate certain industries, it can mean that you don't have that innovation, that you don't have that safety. And then eventually they may be able to leverage it. The other example here is critical minerals. Right. What we have seen in the United States, China, I mean, like the US has been putting a lot of pressure on China. So some people would be like, this is what they have. This is their weapon. They're using it. But effectively, China controls so many of the world's critical minerals. Like I'm talking like 70, 80, 90% in some cases. And as a result of that, they dominate the market. And they have already started cutting the US off from some of these critical minerals, right? Which is good, especially around magnets, which is really important for the development of the technologies of the future, EVs and all these kinds of things, and trucks and stuff like that. So the concern is that once you develop that monopoly, it can be weaponized. And we have seen China starting to do this in some areas. Again, some people would say, well, yes, but they're responding to the US pressure and targeting and stuff like that. Fair, we can have a conversation about it, but that is effectively the security risk. So maybe it's not responding to Donald Trump. Maybe it's responding to the fact that, we've sent a high-level delegation to Taiwan, or we're hosting someone from Tibet, right? These are all the other reasons why China might eventually choose to weaponize its monopoly in ways that would be detrimental to our economy.
Yeah, and just divert to the magnet thing for just a second. I think this is something that they did sign in Germany. Was I think they called it a minerals to magnets pathways or something like that. So I mean, there's certainly an awareness in Europe about trying to develop these critical mineral pathways in Canada because of the threat of Chinese weaponizing their
Right.
supplies.
And it's interesting if you talk to European officials, and I had earlier this year, so I don't know where those conversations are now. But having spoken to some European officials around March, April, they said, dealing with Canada was always considered to be too difficult. We have 13 different economies. We have certain rules around languages and stuff like this. And it's just, we're complicated.
Yeah.
But then they said, we now understand your reliability is your superpower. And as a result of that, I think that we may start seeing more agreements like this. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is a desire. I mean, it is interesting on the campaign trail, Mark Carney, when asked, when he said, what's the greatest threat to to Canada? He didn't say the United States, he said China. Yeah. Which is interesting because he himself has been to China. He knows China. He's been part of different delegations there and things like that. So I thought it was interesting that he said that. And it is interesting that he is clearly trying to convince European partners to, that we all get on board while we're kind of faced with these different threats from China and to a certain extent, the United States as well, right?
For sure. And I guess just to kind of, close the circle here, so we're kind of facing threats from the U.S. and threats from China. And how do we start reconceiving about some of how we need to think about how we're doing things with these kind of threats in mind? Or is that might be too big of a question? But
no,
I think it's.
I think it's something we've been wrestling with for the last couple of decades. And I think to a certain extent, we thought we had sort of solved that problem, especially with the United States. The United States was showing leadership in a lot of ways of not necessarily trying to isolate China, but trying to divert trade away from China and things like this. The challenge we have now is that the country we were banking on to help us has now turned on us. Yeah. Right. And so now we're having to rethink that. And I think the primary concern is that, my colleague Tomas, basically it describes a new equilibrium. That, we had really kind of thought the U.S. would kind of be there in terms of our security. And we always thought we would have access to their markets. And those two items are now very much up in the air. And that, the kind of certainties that we'd expected to last for generations are now might be around might be up for negotiation every 2 to 3 years. Yeah. Right. So that kind of uncertainty is going to be what frames all of this, our relations with China, electric vehicles, critical minerals, green technologies, which also not helpful that the United States has basically decided to ban them. Really, really bad for us. And this is dire, right? This is not good. I never come on to discuss happy things, Dale. And so I think we can reflect that. But I mean, I think this is the way that Canadians are going to have to, we've always felt protected. Yeah. And that certainty is gone. And we are going to have to, as a country, whether it's canola, whether it's electric vehicles or anything we've discussed today, we're going to have to basically now deal with this new uncertainty is really going to be, unfortunately, I think the recipe of the day for the next couple of days.
Yeah, and considering that business certainty is always that buzzword we keep hearing about, that's something we're going to have to, and just have to
if I can just end on that. If I can just end on that note, we keep hearing for business, we just need certainty. We just need certainty. Buckle up, guys. There's no uncertainty. There's no certainty anymore. Yeah. We can do our best to negotiate deals, but we also have to understand those deals might last 2-3 years. And until, quite frankly, the mafia-style tactics that we're seeing in the United States continue to do this. I mean, Carney talks about the weaponization of its place, the United States weaponizing its place in the global economy. It's entirely correct. Yeah. And unfortunately, they do not really distinguish between friend and foe. It's all foes. We are a foe. And it's the idea that we're going to have certainty is hard. And our framing of national security and its role in the economy is really going to be changing, I think, as a result.
For sure. All right. Well, on
It's all
that
bad.
cheerful note, thanks again for doing this.
Have a great day, guys.
And we'll chat again in the near future.
I hope so. Thanks, Dan. Thanks so
All
much for
right.
having me on.
Thanks. And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. It's at Journo_Dale on Twitter and JournoDale no underscore on Bluesky. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.